Gabby, this is just so cool. I've grown up with you, sort of, whether you knew it or not. And I also went to Florida State.
Oh, wow.
And you are a BFD. You're a big deal. And especially there in the circles that I was in, you were like every woman wanted to be at all like you if they could. So thank you for blazing such a trail for us all.
Well, thank you for those kind words. I think, the older I get, the more I realize so much of life is timing. And I sort of feel like we're all kind of little portals, and it's just our time to occupy these portals. It isn't usually us per se. But yeah, I've had weirdly in certain ways, I had some fortunate timing.
You know what? It's so like you to come on and in the first 13 seconds say something so powerful and spiritual. And the thing is that, yes, you could say fortunate because there's been so much yummy, beautiful things that you've experienced in your journey. And I feel like anything I've learned from having Deepak Chopra on this show or Marianne Williamson on this show or anyone like that will say, it is a matching vibe, right? It's a tuning fork, it's a boomerang. And there's something so clearly epic about you that's been there, resonant since you were really young. That was just a match for so much elevation. And so I'm really curious to just dive into it and like hear about all of it from sort of like your vantage point, because it's so unusual, right? That somebody so young is able to tap into this zone of genius and to light such a fire that the world goes, whoa, whoa, what's going on with this girl? What's this about?
Well, I think like a lot of women or people for that matter, but I feel like there's this sort of extra layer with women, which is I think we're all a lot of things. And it's possible maybe because of the way I grew up, a little bit unconventional. I grew up a little bit in Long Island, New York, mostly in the Caribbean, um, without sort of restrictions and expectations. Quite frankly, I wasn't, nobody went to a good school where I grew up. And the idea of like, I mean, there's sort of a running joke in my house with my husband and I that if like we were sober people who could pay our rents, we were sort of ahead of a lot of people that we grew up with, the adults. And so I don't know. I think, and again, the more I've lived, the more I've really appreciated what was something that I was really frustrated about and angry about some things in the way my childhood went. I have since, so it propelled me. Let's say it was a reaction. So I learned to be really resourceful and self-reliant. I'm 6'3". It was like, okay, this size was taking me in this direction. Like, do you want to go to college and hit a white ball? And I was like, yeah, okay, because no one can send me to college. I didn't even think I was going to college. So I would say that some of it in the beginning was certainly a reaction to, well, this feels like a good thing. And I would say this, a long time ago, someone said that Jim Quick said that we're all walking around with a question in our minds, like, and I was like, oh yeah. And I think since very young, I want to say 7 years old, 8 years old, I've had two questions. And because I didn't always live with my parents, there was things about me that were sort of self-guided. My first question is, and I don't know if this is because I'm a Capricorn or whatever, we can load whatever ideas into it that you want, is what's the point? And so I never got caught up, even at 18, living in New York City by myself, being in the fashion business, on a lot of snags that might have gotten other people, because I'd look at things and be like, well, what's the point? And so I think I naturally had a version of that. And then right behind that question was, for whatever reason, and it's again something I've revisited a lot, was, and what's the right way to be? And I know it sounds weird, and I think it had to do with it felt really important to me when I was young. And maybe that's because I didn't see a lot of the adults around me doing this. Some were, some weren't. Like, what was the right way to be? What was the right thing to do? Because I felt like I didn't want to make those mistakes. So it wasn't really out of like some nobility. It was like, yo, I don't want to learn that lesson that way because it feels pretty tough. So I think I was kind of brought into this world with sort of those ideas, and it saved me probably a lot of time and just kept directing me towards things that maybe are overall towards the positive side of the scale.
That's amazing that you kind of had this part of you that was like a witness to the whole thing at a very young age, which people can find that sort of dance with their consciousness, with like getting out of ego. They can, sometimes we find that in meditation, or we find it through other sort of spiritual pursuits, but at a young age to be able to have like a drone view and go, what's the point of all of this? It really takes you out of, like you said, those snags, because your ego is not attached in the way that most people are.
And it's a little, unfortunately, I'll be honest with you, it's a little utilitarian. I have to say, sometimes,
Like this is the downside.
well, yeah, it's like that is the downside. Like it's sometimes it's not, there's so much beautiful nuance in like flowers, that when I see people who go to the store and buy flowers, I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, I don't have like my side of my brain is going like, I've got stuff to do, checklist, that's going to die in 5 days. It's going to make a mess on my counter. So what's the point sometimes needs to also be reeled in
Yeah.
towards, there doesn't need to be a point. As long as it's the things that, enrich you in the real and deep and way. Not, I have a friend, we joke, she was given a yellow diamond. She is so fabulous, right? Like we couldn't be more different. And I remember thinking, I would never, even if you offered it to me, take a yellow diamond, because I'm like, what am I going to do with that? Right. So, I mean, unless it's like you could trade it in and buy a farm with a well because you need water, like whatever BS. So the utilitarian part, I have to say, has been the thing that I really have to work on, because it's not very fun. That's the other thing. It's all cool, like, oh, wow, you work so hard and, oh, sports and all this stuff. But there's a part of it that's like, and my husband has asked me, he's like, what do you do for fun? And I'm like, my life for me being, like everyone's healthy, my kids, they don't hate me, like the house is, it's like, these are the things that always felt important. And I don't mind breaking rules that are made by men or humans per se, but I always felt really afraid to mess around, even as a kid, with like the cosmos or the universal laws. So I think there's both, right? Like I'm happy to break rules here or ask questions. But so let's not make it too sexy. It has a lot of perks. It'll keep you out of trouble. But then you need to build in the layers of sometimes the fine detail.
It's interesting. And I don't want to bring something up that you don't want to talk about, but I think about your dad, and it's just striking because my husband lost his dad when he was a kid unexpectedly. And in our life, in our marriage, he's similar to that. It's kind of like, what's the point? Like he has a little bit of that.
Mhm.
And he also has this, I don't want to, kind of mess up on a spiritual plane. And there's this sort of maybe a little bit of resistance to really celebrating or having a lot of fun. And I've explored that with him a little bit. And when we kind of get down to it, he's like, well, I guess as a kid on some subconscious or conscious level or both, when something really big gets taken away, like the moon in the sky is no longer is there, there's no moon in the sky, then I don't really feel like indulging in celebration, because what if something gets taken away? I'm just curious if any of that is resonant.
It's probably definitely part of it. I have to say, discussing my father's death, I wasn't living with either one of my parents when my father passed away. He died when I was 5. So there was a loss, but it's different than, like, for example, your husband living with his father, all of a sudden the next day somebody isn't coming home. So I want to frame that correctly. But also my mom, she left for a few years and came back. So absolutely, there's a reaction when you're a 2-year-old, when you're being raised by another group, that it's like you're focused on surviving. Now, the thing that's important to hear about that is that every person goes through things. And what I have come at the other end of this is that story and that reaction is just not necessary anymore.
That's right.
And I moved out on my own at 17. I was completely financially independent by 18. I bought my own apartment at Florida State at 19. So I've been for a really long time okay, right? Like I was so like, let's lock it down, like let's get secure, right? And I met my husband at 25. It's like, it's been okay, but it is, it's like you hear people talk about scarcity mentality or those kind of elements. So it's trying to keep those traits moving in your favor, and then saying to the person that you were, it's okay, I've got it. Like it's cool. Like it doesn't exist anymore. I was listening, Byron Katie is a friend of mine, and I was re-listening to Loving What Is, and this guy was in the war, and she was talking about how long were the bombs, and he's like, well, 2 weeks, and she goes, yeah, and 55 years. It's like, I don't want to keep I don't want to keep that story alive. And like she talks about, I just love reality. It's like I would like to keep striving towards those ways of being. And I fail all the time, but it's certainly, and it's more dangerous actually when you've been successful with it.
Oh, this is so juicy. I'm loving that the audience gets to know that not only are we having this conversation, but that you have a podcast, which we're going to talk a lot about, because I'm kind of blown away that you're not only such a rock star in so many ways, but then the way in which you put words together is just, and I've done 650 of these episodes, including hanging out with Byron Katie, who I just love. And you're really just kind of a phenomenon. Like your ability to make sense of what's going on here is probably, it's equal or even more of a standout than like your athleticism. Like really you're quite like plugged in, which is so cool to get to be on the receiving end of this conversation. And I had that experience with Byron Katie too, where I was talking to her and she's like, let me coach you for a second. I'm like, oh God, here we go. And then I tell her 3 things and she asks me 4 more questions, and it leads me to talk something about my childhood. And then she's like, see, there's no problems. I just made all the problems disappear. And I felt this part of me go, oh no, I want that problem. Please don't take that away from me.
Yeah.
And I'm amazed that at that young of an age, I kind of see you as like this real life Star Wars character. I'm like, she's like there, she's got it. She's like, finds the force and then uses it. And it's just so powerful. When you see women, right, from this 30,000 foot view, which you've had it for a while, and you see them getting stuck in those snags, and you see them hitting resistance or not allowing this epic next thing to just be so, what's in the way for them? What do you see that's in the way? And what do you have that you've learned that you want to throw them a line?
It's a great question. And I've actually thought a lot about this for probably 30 years, is because I think I definitely feel like a feminist, because I mean, I live in my masculine quite a bit. I work, I feel empowered. I never felt like half the population was against me. And so I guess for me is, it's scary to sit within yourself and to say, this is what I would like, this is what I would like to go for, this is who I would like to be with. These things are all very scary. And so sometimes it maybe feels easier to delegate that it's not happening because someone's not letting me. And also, men are more comfortable with being isolated or unpopular,
Totally true.
separated from the
Yes.
like, I'm sorry you don't like it, suck it, this is just how it is. And no matter who we are, most women, because we're taught, like, is that okay, to be nice and all these things. I get it. I always say the only women I've never seen that suffer it quite this much are usually women that grow up with brothers, because they learn a different language early, like even rabble rousing, and like it's not personal, and they
It's true.
switch gears and things, and like you want to get a peanut butter and jelly sandwich right after they've had a fist fight on the basketball court. Like it's just an easier thing. I'm an only child, so I this, and also to say what you want. And so and it's very hard to be unpopular, I think, when you're a female, no matter what we say. And
It's
then
so true.
you see women circle around 40, could be sooner, could be a little later. They usually go, oh my God, I'm too busy for this. Like if they choose to have kids, then they're too busy with that. And then if you want to add work, and if they have a relationship, or if they are work, or it's just time. So what I would say is this: life is unfair. And when I look at things, I could say, well, this felt unfair, but then I could conversely look to the other side and go, and look at how unfair this was in my favor. So it swings all these ways, right? Like, hey, life, period, is unfair. But to sit and go, this is unfair, is unproductive. But to get in there and say, well, within the situation, I would like to be a part of the changes. And typically blaming people without action or plan is just kind of complaining and whining. And by the way, if, let's say, for example, you were trying to get a group of men to hear you, they don't actually hear a lot of complaining. They hear, I feel like this, I need this to happen. That's how they hear. And so I find it interesting that women have to then also be willing to irritate, to offend some people, even her fellow sisters. So,
Yeah.
I'm going to make a terrible analogy, but I watched Bill Burr the other day talking about feminism and how it's not going to work and all these things. And why is it men's jobs to watch women's sports? Like,
I know
it's all
that
this stuff.
whole routine.
Okay. So, but the thing is, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true, as rain. And so it's right as rain. And so for me, I look at that and go, I'm going to get involved. And if I'm not involved, I'm not going to complain.
Yeah. It's so true. I was just asking my agent last week, why do you think Joe Rogan is where he is? And she said, oh, he's unapologetic, period. That's it. He's just unapologetic. He's just willing.
He's authentic.
Right. Like, this is my truth. And
Yeah.
that is what it is. And I'm moving on. Like, that's it. So it's powerful. And I want to say something about being powerful, which is to piggyback on what you're saying. I see so many women, and you just expressed it so well. They want to be pleasing. They want to belong. They want to be liked. It's exhausting. And so often they are sacrificing so much for that. And I think about you, and especially from the time that I was aware of you, and just this like magnetic beauty, right? And what's interesting though, and like nuanced and like rarefied about you and the oxygen you breathe and the oxygen you give, is it wasn't just, oh, here's a beautiful human being. It's like powerful. There was something about you. It wasn't just like, oh, here's another beautiful body of a girl with a face. It was like behind your eyes, it was like this force, this power, this standing in your skin, like really owning the freaking space. And that I hadn't seen in a model. I hadn't seen that in anybody, forget a model, in any girl that I had known. And I think about how many women I meet and I think, you're so cute. I got it. You're so sweet. I understand. You've made that clear. You're so likable. Yes, but you're also freaking so powerful. Where is it? Bring it to the table. Come forward, please. Right?
Well, we have to
that's what I want to ask you about. Go ahead.
Well, we have to, it's okay. I'm going to confess. I had a really beautiful mother, like very beautiful. And I saw very early, I'll tell you 2 quick stories. I saw very early the limitation of that power. And I'm not talking like, oh, she's attractive. This is a beautiful woman, 6'2.5", and like walk in the room and stuff's happening, right? But the power, the true power in that is very, very limited, shallow. And then and then the other thing that really taught me this was simultaneously to playing ball at Florida State, I was modeling. I've told the story before. I literally was in a gentleman's named Albert Watson in his studio. He was a very famous photographer. And if you were working at Albert's studio, you were very fortunate. And I was there with another model who was extraordinarily beautiful. And you know, she didn't seem particularly more happy. She wasn't more bold, more confident, more, you know, and she was, in our terms and definition of physical beauty and stature, perfect. Okay. I got in a plane, I fly to Tallahassee, Florida. I go to a stinky Tully gym, and I'm there with my teammates. They're sweaty, maybe a couple pimples here and there, imperfect, a little bit, butts are too big because everyone's big because we eat bang iron and whatever. It's just the way it is. So confident, so robust, so full of life. And I thought, if I was drawn towards something more than something else, it wasn't, I could appreciate this aesthetic, but what I realized is the power was in how you felt about yourself. And that if you were willing to work really hard and also develop a skill and sort of take a sense of who you are, not try to be, that's one blessing of being 6'3" at 15. I gave up a long time ago trying to fit in or be like everyone else.
Right. Never happened.
I'd love to say I was so wise, it just forced my hand. It was like, you're just going to get there sooner because that's how it's happening. But what I want to say to people is all the people that we're truly drawn towards are the people that aren't leading with, hey, do you like me? Am I pretty? Is my hair nice? My handbag matches my shoe. We're drawn to people that it feels like they're walking around really as who they are. And maybe they've also, it's almost like they have a secret. So maybe they've busted their ass in some way. And also they're not afraid of you. Right? So if I meet another woman and they get right into my face and space and they're like, how's your day going? I'm like, this is who I want to know, you know, versus so that we're not threats to one another. Like, we're in it, and you have your real estate and I have my real estate. And I'm kind of intrigued by what you have going on. And so certainly sports, because by the way, fashion, you learn it, and in sports, because there's just a lot of badass girls. And you just go, yeah, great. I'm not going to fight this. I'm going to celebrate this. But I have to keep paying attention to who I am, and also keep saying, who am I also still trying to become, and work hard at that and take ownership of that and do that and not just give lip service to that. And what you find is it's imperfect. Let me tell you, I look in the mirror some days at my age and go, holy cow, it's just not the way it used to be. But it seems a lot easier.
Oh my God. It's like medicine to hear you for so many reasons. But one of them is that I feel like myself and so many women that I meet feel as though, as we dream about this future, this thing that we've always felt called towards, we feel like having it at some point would be so great, and it would cost a lot on some level. It would cost our integrity, or it would cost some version of our alignment. And I listen to you speak and I feel, more than even hear, I feel you. And I'm like, of all the things, right? Being this much of an Olympian and a model, an actual, like, of all the things, to not get bumped out of alignment, right? To be able to say the words you're saying, having been in the belly of the beast, right? And you're walking through fashion shows and you're playing in stadiums, and this is what's continuing to swirl on the axle inside of you. It's mesmerizing. It demystifies, because what we see from the outside is, oh, if she's going to wind up, making that contract, there's some version of herself she just had to give away to do it. But you've come out the other side and you're continuing to do it. But like, you come out here having been in it for a long time and your vortex is clean. Like, you didn't, I'm amazed,
But
honestly.
also let's keep everything really transparent. There's a part of me that also I don't know that more attention was really important to me. Um, and there are days, I'll be honest, where I'm like, oh, because what attention does is attention brings options. Like, what job do you want to take and who do you want to work with? What creative person? So attention isn't, for me, was never the sake of attention for attention. It was just like, if I get enough attention, I can keep the options going, right? And I can do that. But there are times where it is a tricky dance of attention is connected to your business. It's really trying to control yourself and say, you have to be like, you have to self-regulate, and there's a lot of stuff you won't do. And you'll pay a different price for that, but you're always kind of aware of it. And also, what's the point got me into, I have really good friendships. I have at least we're married still, it's been almost 25 years. I joke, it's every day, you earn that every day, right? And I have a great husband. I'm not saying it's like it's a battlefield, but I'm saying, like, I wake up each day and I'll do my best and let's see what happens. You don't assume like, well, we have kids and houses, so it's just going to go on and on. It's like, hey, we're working for it every day. But I think that I don't want to be fooled. And I saw the story all around me so often that it was like, hey, money's not going to do it. Extra people telling you how great you are isn't going to do it. And there's actually a really good book, you probably know about it. Arthur C. Brooks wrote Strength to Strength.
I
And
actually don't know it, but I know
it's
who he is. He's amazing.
yeah, it's a beautiful book if anybody wants to read it. And I think it's very clear in the end, it's friends and family and some form of faith that really make us happy, truly. And there's so many stories about, like, and if the earlier you're identified as, quote, I say, special, or you have a gift,
Right.
the greater chance of being absolutely miserable in your later years is much higher. So I think for me, I saw the stories playing out all around me, and I just thought, oh, I don't want to do that. But there's been times where I'm like, you know what, maybe I should have gone for it more. But I've spent a lot of time in my real life.
If it wasn't already that we've had, like, a lot of conversation about things that are just not talked about every single day in this way, I think that alone, what you just said about your marriage, just that piece, that is so unusual. And I know a little bit about your background, and that is so uncommon, right? That people stay married, especially when they're living in the public eye. I mean, it's very uncommon. And I know for myself, having gone through just my childhood, my parents got divorced, and then just so much turbulence there. And my dad, my husband's dad died, so he didn't see a marriage, and there was a lot of pain. It's just been, wow. Like, it's taken a tremendous amount of courage for me to face my stuff and be willing to sit beside the river and learn to receive, or learn to not use my old survival stuff. Like, it's, wow, does that take a lot? And you, having come from where you came from, plus talk about options when you have attention.
Yeah.
I had Rob Lowe on the show, and I said, can I just say out loud that it must be a mission to stay married, not because your wife isn't, she's adorable. I said, every second of your life, women can't help throw them. And he's like, it's true. What you just said is it is something we have to talk about all the time. So it's like, you happen to be one of the most beautiful women in the world. You also have the background you have, and you are married. Like,
but we don't have that. I'll be honest with you, because also it's an energy, right? I think men, I don't mean this in an oversimplification way. I think, well, first of all, when you make your marriage, and then if you have a family, a priority, you know how to sort of tend to the garden, if you will. And that keeps, it's sort of like being waterproof, so little drops can't get in, because the problem is if you're not tending to the garden, things get fragmented, and then there's sort of open doors, I think. I think it would be harder for men in a different way because first of all, men are it's different. Like if I'm aggressed by a male or receive an invitation, I can sort of rebuff it easier, like, oh, haha, and actually my energy is like, most people are not flirting with me. They're just not. They're like, it could be like a high five. And like, now I'm fucking getting called ma'am. I mean, come on. But anyway, I get these young male athletes and they're like, yes, ma'am. I'm like, yeah, okay. But anyway, uh, and that's okay because it's interesting, like when women talk about like when they walk through the city and nobody's looking at them anymore. And I'm like, okay, if a 22-year-old guy whistled at me, would I be like, let's go to the hotel room? I wouldn't. So why do I need that affirmation from them? And I'm done having kids, so I don't need to biological signal the whole planet. Like I'm over here. It's like, I'm good. I want to own businesses and be people's bosses. And as long as my partner is looking at me like, you want to go upstairs? I'm good. But you have to tend to that garden. I have to make the invitation. It can't always be his invitation. And I asked Laird actually, why are you, because he's weirdly, I think, built for monogamy way more than me. And he's like, I go, what is it with you? And he's like, I want to be happy.
I love your impression of it.
And I think in a way I go, because he's like, all the guys I really looked up to when I was younger had this whole thing going where they had this, this relationship and they were men to me, not guys who were like, doing whatever and whatever. And so, but I've been together with my husband for almost 27 years. And I will say that we had to almost crash and burn at least 2 times before we sort of understood the gift that it is if you find someone you actually really love, are attracted to, and admire, and can kind of get into it with.
Yeah.
And so how do you take care of that? So I didn't stumble into it like, oh yeah, we got this right. It's like, oh, okay. We had to kind of go, should we break up? Yeah, I think we should. Okay, no, we shouldn't. Okay, let's not. So let's be clear. Some of it's just learning the communication, but it's an energy and you can't feed those needs by hoping someone, desires you, because that's just a never ending situation that's not only going to cause you a lot of heartache, but it's going to kind of take you nowhere. And by the way, I had a lot of fun before I met my husband. So, like, I didn't, it's something crazy, but I was like, oh, what's that? Ooh, what's this? And okay,
Yeah. I went to Florida State and I know the fun that is to be had there too. And I can't imagine on your level and then living the life that you've lived, how many stories, good stories you probably have. But in that moment when you guys decided not to crash and burn and to come back together, what's one thing or maybe 2 things that you realized you needed to sort of press play on in order for this to sustain itself?
Well, I give my husband actually a lot of credit. I'm very prideful. And Laird is the one who really sort of allowed me to go through being scared of intimacy, because of course it's not going to work out. And he was always there, like with his heart out and his neck on the chopping block. So what I will say is that he gave me a little bit of room to be scared. And then I realized it's all a risk, everything we do. And why do I need, what does Katie call it? Like past futuring? Why do I need to be reacting to things that are not happening? Why don't I spend time in the moment and enjoy it?
Yeah.
And the thing I didn't know how to do well that I have learned is to have healthy, not to be afraid of confrontation. I'm very in a certain way, I didn't want to rock the boat. And so I didn't know how to really clearly say, hey, this is how I'm feeling, and that's not going to work for me. Or are you going to be done with this soon? And when you talk, like I had to say that Laird and I had a little thing the other night, and I go, I don't need to be reprimanded by my partner. Like, you're not my dad. So let's figure this out. Because he can stomp around sometimes. And I'm like, usually I'm bulletproof. But on this day, I was like, yeah, no, like I'm not going to get reprimanded by you. And in my 20s, I don't know that I would have been able to do that without being hysterical first, like get so pissed off and then freak out. It's like, yo, that's just not working. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. We've had like I think more than 2 of those moments, like probably 6 moments where I thought like, that's it, I'm out, I'm pulling the plug. And again, he's similar where he kind of gives me tether to be really scared. And what I learned for myself, which is kind of juicy and interesting, is that, as Esther Hicks would say, like the reality I thought I was observing, I was creating. And then it was like, wait, I can be such a badass and like manifest in other things when I just see it and allow it to like just be there. And then it's just a tuning fork. It just shows up. With him, it was always so hard. Like I would sit down to meditate, and then I would sort of feel into some of us would show up in my meditation. I just feel all this resistance. And it was like, oh, I can't believe in the possibility that my marriage can feel as good as my career or my kids, or I couldn't fully receive that. And then it was like, oh, so then he keeps reading that signal. So what if I just fully believed in that, and I held a steady vibration there? It's like, then it's amazing what he becomes when I do that. It's just crazy amazing. And I say that also to piggyback into maybe something else, which is like, people want to look around, and this is like something Byron Katie would say too, and like point to all the ways in which they're right, that other people are helping them have what they want or not helping them, right? Whereas I look at you and your life, and I said this when we started, but there's no way to contend with the fact that you were available for this much expansion. Like, that comes from your soul, that comes from your signal. No one can perceive reality for you. No one can focus attention for you. Nobody can vibrate for you. It was you, so young, so willing to be available for this field of infinite what this has been. And so I ask you, like, I sit with so many women now, hundreds of thousands, millions of people write letters, and they see the world as, oh, I couldn't possibly do this. I'm not enough. I'll never make 100,000. I'll never be able to have a better relationship. What? Why constantly signing off and co-signing scarcity when you can choose from this buffet? And you knew how to do that so young. So when it comes,
I want to confess one thing to you though.
Yeah.
I think it's important. There's a part of me that really always felt like I wanted to be a certain level of success, but I saw a really big success, ruin everyone I knew, their lives. The collateral damage on their lives was really significant. And so my next thing I have really been working on is trying to get rid of that ceiling too.
Interesting.
Because my real life, my relationships, my children, my friendships, that's always going to be the number one. I knew, from the beginning that sort of well-being was going to really be the most important thing for me. And so now I'm trying to think like, okay, well, ideas, if they're really uber successful, then that's just a representation that it was that idea was right and it worked out and you did it the right way. Not, it's now going to be a representation of something that can hurt my life. Because you've seen it, I'm sure, with people that you've interviewed. It's like, man, the world thinks you're awesome and your bank account is like beyond, but you're in just a shit show in your real life.
Oh yeah.
And I need it the other way. So I'm just confessing to you so that I'm being accountable to like even the stuff I'm managing, which is like, I can put a governor on things like, oh, that's good. That's a good amount of success. Oh, that's cool. Because it's like, oh, not too much, because it might, and also sometimes it's the thing of you're in these dynamics in a relationship and it can be tricky if the outside world, in that definition, you become more successful or more powerful than your partner. Even though if they're greatest, baddest ass, I have the most masculine, attentive, incredible husband, there's always a voice and sometimes in the back that's like, oh, got to keep those scales kind of even, right? Because girls have to deal with that. And I don't care what anyone tells me. So it's managing all this nuance that no matter how many years you're together, and my husband's very successful, there's these dances that you're trying to figure out for the first time.
I totally hear all of that and have been navigating that. And I feel like that's a whole other podcast
Right.
about
I'm
women
sorry.
who, no, it's so good. Like how many women now are just in a different lane and don't want to, bump into static with their husband and are trying to keep expanding and yet make sure his ego feels okay so that they can just have a sense of like polarity in a sexy way. Like there's a lot of interesting things about that I've learned. Let's talk about your podcast,
Okay.
because now that we're talking, like I said, I'm so excited for our listeners that they can go listen continuously to you. What made you want to take that journey, having all this other stuff going on? You're like, oh yeah, a podcast. I'm gonna do that.
Well, in 1992, I did my first television show with MTV. I had a show. I was hired basically by MTV and a guy named Dan Cortez to do MTV Sports. And so I started interviewing people a long time ago. And then I did another show and I would write columns. And the whole thing for me is I really like learning. And also I like it when it's not about me. I really enjoy that. I'm perfect. Like, yeah, great. Like, the word producer, I would have been a very good producer or director. I just do the other stuff because it feeds the things I'm curious about. So for me, it's forced learning. And I really, my hope is this. I have had the great opportunity to be sort of at the sharp end of the stick in a lot of ways in the self-care or health space. Now, how do we make that message simple, actionable for people who are overwhelmed in their life? And also, how do we make that feel inclusive? What I started to really understand is that like health and organic and like all this stuff was becoming more and more of this exclusive proposition.
Yeah.
So my thing is, if I can be a facilitator or a bridge and simultaneously selfishly continuing to keep my toe in the water about, hey, what is going on? What is available? That seemed worthy of the time.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that you just added that piece, because I didn't even really get that. I kind of knew that you were doing that, but I've listened to some of your episodes, and the fact that that was part of like this whole, sort of focus is so important, because I do think, and I'm kind of allergic to it, how many people just get so overwhelmed by taking their health into like account as number one priority, and they just like push it aside. It's like, no. Like, like we've had Dan Buettner on this show and we've talked about the blue zones, and it's like, you can read it in black and white. These people live a long time. Why? It's these 9 things. Just go do them. And I say to him with tears in my eyes, so why don't people do this? You have evidence, you have so much. And he goes, I don't know. They can't hear it. Like, it seems so overwhelming. It's too hard. Right. So because that seems to be the trend, what's one little thought or one little concrete thing in addition to a thought that might help us lean into being healthier, like now, today, by the end of today?
I was thinking actually your podcast it has a different impact on people's health, because if we can get to the core of who we are essentially, then we can start to take care of that person.
That's interesting.
And so we have to look inside of ourselves. And when I say that, it's like that real check-in. What's going to work for me? Because that's going to be different than what works for you. And it can't be like, I need to lose weight. That is an ambiguous, with no plan, with nothing. What's a strategy? Nothing. So first and foremost, what I really believe is that when we don't feel good, meaning connected to somebody, connected to ourselves, how about that? We can't start. Doesn't matter how many, push-ups and pull-ups and jumping jacks or spin classes you take. So actually, it's really first your spirit and sense of checking in with yourself and being like, oh yes, I am important enough that I better figure out how I should be eating and moving. And the next thing I need to do is I need to put a plan in place. Because you're not going to, you can have all the information in the world if you don't have an application and a strategy and a practice, including me, it means nothing. So, if you want to just say generically, I would say breathing in and out of your nose only, keeping your mouth closed, unless you ladies are doing sprints, that is one of the number one things we could be doing. Do not mouth breathe. And it's free and cheap, and you can do it anywhere. If you want to get technical, do a 3 parts breath. Don't make it horizontal where your shoulders come up and down. Make it don't make it vertical, make it horizontal, like a big circle. Let your lower belly, we're all holding our bellies in. Ladies are holding their bellies in. Pull in through the nose, push out your lower soft belly, soft. That's the first part of the breath. The second part's the lower ribs. And the third part, let's say, would be like the lats, and make it a round circle, and then breathe out through the nose. Most of us are breathing 10 to 15 breaths per minute. You want to bring that down to 3 or 4. Why? Now you're down regulating. So most of your day, you won't be in fight or flight. You'll be calmer, and you'll be oxygenating your system because you're breathing in and out of your nose, not your mouth. More technical, when you breathe with your mouth, you scrub CO2. When you scrub CO2, you can absorb what's in your bloodstream into your tissues and cells. So free and anywhere, breathe through your nose. But first, check in with yourself. I mean, like, check in and peel it back. Like, if something's stopping you, what is it? Work on that, because we all know what we should do. The information, we've been hit over the head to death with it. We all know. Vegetables, and if you're not a vegetarian or vegan, plants and animals, real food, walk around the edge of the store. I mean, we all heard it. Drink more water, be hydrated, get to bed. It's true. But if we don't value and love, ourselves in that way, and understand the precious commodity that health is, it's hard to sustain it.
I am just blown away. I'm today years old when I've ever heard that about breathing in through your nose. And I was a songwriter for 10 years. That's what I did, is wrote TV.
And
But no, and I never heard that. And I have a broken nose, actually, and a deviated septum, and I don't breathe through my nose. And you're the first person, after I've heard it from my ENT. Your nose is ornamental. It doesn't do anything. But this is the first moment I'm like, maybe I should go get that fixed, because I can't breathe through my nose.
You could, I had to get one of my nostrils cauterized when I was very young. And when I started rigorously doing nose breath, I would actually have a bloody nose in the shower for about a week. So we have to also have patience with that, because you build moisture between your lungs and your nasal passageway the more you do it. And it also, like I said, it just keeps us, we're not breathing into our chest, and we're not out of our minds all day long.
I mean, what you just said about down regulating is so important. And I love that you just handed us something that we can do right away. It's incredible. And like you said, prioritizing and getting that there needs to be this, like, leaning into and gentleness with self. That's the most important thing. I fainted on Mother's Day because I was running around taking care of my mom, my stepmom, my sister, my 3 daughters, like running around, and I hadn't eaten. And they handed me a Bellini at this place, and I just passed out in the parking lot. And this happens a lot, like more than I'd like to admit. And I talked to this woman who's a nutritionist, and she's like, where is the, like, I'm going to love myself and the inside of this vessel so that I can even give to the world? And I'm like, this has to stop. This has to become the most important, sexy priority in your life. And I was just in tears, because I know that story too well. I think so many women beat that drum of, I just show up for everyone all day and then I'm depleted. And it's like, that is not going to work. It's not sustainable.
It's not only not going to work, you're going to be really pissed off at the end of all of it. You're not going to be liking very many people in your family. You're going to resent it. And I think that a little positive selfishness is really good. And that's what you're going to teach your daughters. You're going to teach your daughters through exampling, through modeling. Hey, I love you guys. But I will put myself at as high as I can, so that I can be here. Listen, I serve my family. I'm of service to my family. That is my desire. I love it. And simultaneously, sometimes I'm like, F off, I got 30 minutes, I'm going, and I'm going to do whatever training, and you can wait.
What is you mentioned the practice, what I can't even imagine that it would be anything close to what we could, or I could take on. But I'm just curious, at your level, what's your practice that you have for your health?
Oh, well, I mean, I probably train a lot less than people realize because of my other businesses and work, but I mean, 4 or 5 days a week, but I train pretty rigorous. So when I do it, I do it. But again, I have a plan. I will give you another tip that a friend of mine, PJ Nestler, taught me. PJ is a high performance coach. He works with us with XPT, and he says, listen, whatever you want to work on. So if you go, hey, I want to be stronger, ladies, do not run away from weights. It is so important. Like, especially as we get older, you've got to bet, you have to have a little time under tension. It's good for your bones. You're not going to get too big, like get over it. So if you're cardiovascular, your mobility, which also would then sort of equate resilience. So that means not moving in a straightaway plane, the sagittal plane, but moving in like weird twisting ways. Okay, so you have flexibility, cardio, strength, resilience, and flexibility, right? So what you would say is for 8 weeks or 12 weeks, 2 to 3 months, I'm going to make this the lion's share of what I'm doing. Then you make little improvements. So if you're doing flexibility, of course, one day and you'll get your cardio in there, and then you might get one day of strength training, but it won't be your focus. Then after you do that, do a different block, and then do a different block. And that's how we make progress. We can't do everything all at once, because then we end up nowhere. And then because years go by, we end up behind. So if I could say to somebody, what do you think would serve you the best right now? Okay, dedicate 8 weeks, 12 weeks, and then move on to the next.
So good. It's so helpful. I'm going to do that. We've been vacationing, but as soon as I get back to LA, I'm going to do this. I'm saying this out loud so my listeners keep me accountable. I'm going to get a trainer and I'm going to do this because I have to. I can't keep saying I'm going to do it.
Well, do it with a friend. You need a built-in accountability, and write it down either on your phone calendar, or if I also keep a paper calendar so I can see everything. It keeps me kind of organized, is write it down, because it will get eaten. The day, the kids, the work
Right.
will eat it alive. I suffer from this all the time.
That makes a lot of sense. So I want everyone to check out the podcast, and I'm curious, like for you, you've interviewed so many cool people, and a lot of these people are probably people you've known for years. What do you think is one of the things that you've learned in doing the podcast and sitting down and having this dedicated time? What's one of the things maybe you've taken away or that surprised you in a good way that you now sort of walk around with as part of your like curriculum for life that you got from the podcast?
I think for me personally, it would be more of the spiritual components, not so much the content, uh, not the nuts and bolts. I knew a lot of that already.
Yeah.
I think if I was going to talk nuts and bolts, I would remind people the real power of your microbiome and your immune system. 60% of your immune system is in your microbiome. A good person to look at for this is either Dr. Mark Hyman or Dr. Jeffrey Bland. Those are good people for references for that kind of education. I think certainly Katie, I went through a very difficult time with one of my daughters who now is thriving and is almost an adult. But in speaking with Katie and some of the things of undoing the narratives that we sort of started with,
Yeah.
I think for me, that has been sort of the most important thing. Another nuts and bolt thing is if you do have a listener that is training very hard, usually women that train really hard are not eating enough calories, certainly not enough protein, and they should be open-minded that intermittent fasting, even though it's on trend and there's a lot of great qualities to it, may not serve the highly active woman.
That's so interesting. And I love what you said about that spiritual piece. And also, I never heard that. I know a lot that this is in the zeitgeist about microbiome and making sure we understand our gut health, but I didn't know it was responsible for 60% of what's happening in our immune system. That is, I mean, especially with what's going on with this pandemic, you would think that we would understand more about our immune system than we do about elections and who's running for, like, this is insanity. Like,
Yeah.
that,
If
yeah.
your audience was going to observe any vitamins to explore, because that itself is overwhelming, I would explore, and they have to, ask I'm not a doctor, but what always shows up, most of us are vitamin D deficient, zinc, magnesium, quercetin, quercetin. You'll see the suggestion for 500 milligrams. You can actually go to 1,000. There's a great book called Drop Acid if people want the science on that. The other thing is omega-3s for women especially. It is very good for their microbiome. And if you're in and around pregnancy and nursing or after, the omegas can really support women and even around their cycle. So I would just sort of say, hey, I know it's a pain in the butt. What really should I take? Pretty much. We'll keep it simple for now.
I can't even begin to tell you how, like, from the second you came on, like, every ounce of this conversation was just packed with value. Like, I just feel like you're so generous, you're so ridiculously humble, you're so loving. I'm like, I'm just like, I'm just kind of in awe. I'm like
Well,
amazed.
it's selfish because I don't need to learn the lesson that we're connected, and I don't need to learn the lesson that if I want to keep having as much fun as I'm having, I need to be a good steward. So it is for selfish reasons.
You're so stunning. And this was like listening to music the whole time. I just felt like I'm like John Williams at the Hollywood Bowl. And I'm just like,
Settle down.
it's like, it's
Settle
so
down.
good. It's so good, Gabby.
Okay, I want to say one thing for women is that the most badass people I've ever met, and certainly, I guess what I want for women to understand is we don't have to forego our love and lovingness and femininity because we need it. And I don't mean wearing skirts. I'm not talking about that kind of femininity. I'm talking about the feminine energy. We can't lose one to get the other. Like, I want all of you to go out and crush it and just, take prisoners and don't, no names, and do whatever you want. I want you to just go for it. Be the CEO. Don't be the CEO. Stay at home, raise the kids, hardest job, whatever you want to do. But we don't, to go into the masculine, to go into the clear communicator, we don't have to lose the other. And in fact, that is our power, right? The fact that we can be loving or be intuitive or have that, so I guess if I could just say that before we end, like, that for me is, if we can just keep juggling those two energies, then I feel that it just makes it, we contribute so much more to our worlds that we live in.
It is so incredibly, it's just astoundingly true. And I, over the last couple of years, have been thinking about energy versus matter. And like, an atom is 1% particle and 99% energy. And we live in this world that's so consumed with like the doing. And if you look at the anatomy, the male gives and the woman receives, and you think about this creation process. And even though that one moment of the masculine is so integral, you have to have it. The whole deal, 99% of this whole thing is just from making a space, right? Being the magnet, creating the space. And gosh, could the world benefit from that energetic. And so I just love how you just shared that. And I love how tapped in you are. And what's really cool is that you are a walking reminder of that possibility on every level. So you're co-signing that constantly. And your resonance, your very resonance is like putting that into the ocean. So I'm so happy that you do you, and that you got to come on here today. And I'm so excited to play this for our audience because they're just going to go nuts. So tell everybody where they can find just the podcast Gabby, and whatever else.
Yeah, it's the Gabby Reece Show because I'm so original, and at Gabby Reece on Instagram. And just thank you for having me on and for being, you're very kind and loving. And I really appreciate that. Thank you.
So such a gift, so easy.